Welcome to the Futurebuild podcast, where we spotlight the changemakers, disruptors, and leaders who are driving innovation and sustainability in the built environment. I'm your host, Martin Hurn, and today's episode is all about education, collaboration, and the power of a shared mission to transform the construction industry from the inside out. Joining me is someone who's played a truly pivotal role in reshaping our industry, thinks about skills, sustainability, and supply chains. Ian Heptonstall. Ian is co-founder of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, a pioneering initiative that has trained over 50,000 people and partnered with more than 240 businesses across the UK and now globally. In this episode, Ian takes us behind the scenes of the school's journey from its roots in recognising deep knowledge gaps across the sector to building one of the most influential platforms for sustainability education in the industry. We talk about the big challenges facing construction today, the power of collaboration, and how digital tools, off-site methods, and inclusive practices can help build a better future. Now, it's not just for the workforce, but the entire built environment. So if you're in construction, design, development, or procurement, or you're just passionate about creating a more sustainable and equitable future, this episode is for you. So let's get into it. Ian, fantastic to have you on the podcast today.
It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
I always start off the podcast with asking people about sort of a bit about their background and how you got into the built environment.
That's quite a long story, but an interesting story. Well, interesting to me. I'm not sure if it's interesting to your listeners. But okay, I got into the built environment because when I first came to London, like your Dick Whittington thing, I actually got a job in the events industry. Don't know why, I just did. It was like, telesailing, exhibition stands. And that company went bust. So I set up my own conference business. And we had a conference business where we were helping large businesses to understand their supply chains, and we did a lot of work within the construction sector. So working with main contractors, big infrastructure companies, and also house builders to understand who were their tier one contractors, who were their subcontractors, and where did smaller and regional businesses fit into those supply chains. And actually, innovation, how did you find small businesses who could offer you that local supply or that innovative supply, which is quite important. So got into doing those conferences for a number of years and really enjoyed those, and grew up a decent sized business doing those across the UK. But at the same time as doing that, I had a mentor, and the mentor said, "Ian, you're doing really well in business." He says, "But the problem is, it's intangible. You need to get yourself a tangible product." I said, "What do you mean? You should buy some property." And we were based in Shoreditch at the time. I don't know if you know, 1991 in Shoreditch, it was a real recession, and it was like tumbleweed, and you could buy property cheaper than you could rent it for. It was that ridiculously cheap. So we bought old disused factories in Shoreditch, and we decided to convert them into residential units. So our operations were, how do you take the basement, ground floor, first floor, make them into, strip out all the kind of traditional kind of 1970s, 1980s office and take them back to like Dragon's Den style with the kind of, the brick exposed walls, making use of all the features. Stuff. And then we changed all the floors above those into residential and would normally build another 2 floors on the top, which ironically, in this day and age now, we might call that a retrofit program, yeah? So we'd fit it out with new stuff and all that type of stuff. And people at the time thought we were bonkers because they were saying, "So you're taking out all that really nice plasterboard and those ceilings." I said, "Yeah, but they're not really nice. People don't want those." So we got into doing that, and actually it took off, and it was pretty good. And it was actually, the market was rising pretty fast once you got out of the early 1990s. So I always thought I wasn't a very good builder, but we were a pretty good developer. We knew what to buy, we knew how to get the planning and all that type of it. But when it came to the actual building part of it, we soon realised that actually we'd be better off contracting and going down the contracting model. So I ran this career in parallel to my conference career for quite some time. So I had a lot of in-depth knowledge about how construction sites actually worked. At the same time as running a conference business, which is quite sizable, but I had a fundamental understanding about how those complex supply chains work. And I think sometimes we forget how complex supply chains are in construction, and that, if you're a Barratt or a Morgan Stanley or a Balfour Beatty and you're running a site, you could sometimes only have 3 people of your own employ on that site, and then you might have 40 different subcontract packages on that site. You've got a whole range of different suppliers delivering to that site. The subcontractors have then got their own subcontractors, and probably 50% of the people working on site are self-employed as well. So you've got a very complex environment to deliver a project in, and I think understanding that made it a lot easier in my conference business. And the conference business then became, how do you understand supply chains, which is where I met my business partner and co-founder of Action Sustainability, Sean McCarthy, and he was the procurement director of Heathrow Airport at the time. And the really interesting thing about that was that he gave me a ring one day out of the blue, didn't know him, and he said, "Ian, I've been told I need to speak to you." I said, "What's your problem?" And he said, "I've done the classic procurement thing of reducing my supply chain to a manageable number, 500. But this means I've upset 4,500 people in the local supply chain, and we've just put in for planning permission for Terminal 5, and I've got a real problem because I've got to somehow explain to those companies there's a better way into my supply chain." I said, "Well, I can help you with that." So we started working with the airport and other big, really large construction companies who build lots of construction, and talking about where, helping them to understand where the tier 1 was, the tier 2 and tier 3, and where the opportunities are to get into the supply chains. And that really helped. And nowadays we all call that social value, we call it community benefits. Back in the day, we didn't have a name for it, we just did it. And at the same time, Sean once came to me and said, "I've been given the task of developing Heathrow Airport's first carbon strategy. But I don't know what a carbon strategy is. How do we do that then?" And it was kind of literally back in the early 1990s. You were kind of making this up as you went along. Yeah. Well, you didn't have sustainability professionals in organisations. So Sean and I worked in these kind of different worlds for a while. And we got involved in a Tony Blair program called Procuring the Future, where we wrote a white paper on how do you use procurement power to deliver more sustainable outcomes. So how do you use that procurement leverage to really drive changes in behaviour in the supply chain? Because fundamentally, suppliers will do what their customer wants. Yeah. So how can we, buy the future, for want of a better phrase? How can we buy better outcomes? And if you put it into your bids, our belief, if you put it into your bids and your tenders and you design it in at the beginning of a project, rather than for asking for it halfway through, you can actually deliver a lot of the sustainability outcomes you want at value, rather than it costing extra. So Sean and I got involved in that, and eventually I said to Sean, 2005, I said, "Sean, we need to set up a social enterprise to deliver this, because I've got a company, you've got a full-time job." And Sean then went on to be on the Sustainability Commission for the Olympics. Yeah. So we were like, I suppose we were leading the charge in this area around sustainable construction, sustainable supply chain management. So we set up Action Sustainability, which is a non-for-profit organisation. And that's how I got into this whole kind of sustainable construction side. And when I then sold my business in 2010 and said, there really is something in sustainability. It is the future, even though the current government back in 2010 was saying, well, we're going to step back on a few of those things for a while. We've got a big recession going on, so let's park that for a while. Maybe not unlike some of the things which are going on at the moment, yeah. So when we first started, the world of sustainable construction, the world of sustainability was, especially in supply chains, was quite a tough ask. Yeah. Most organisations were still, if they were thinking about sustainability, were thinking about their own impacts in their own organisation, and weren't focusing on actually what's the impact, what we now call scope 3, what's the impacts in your supply chain, or what's the impacts downstream when you've built a building. Yeah. What's the holistic view of the sustainability impacts, rather than the very small about impacts that a construction company has, which, if I'm a Barratt or a Morgan Sindall, potentially my scope 1, scope 2 emissions are probably at 2%, 3% of my total emissions as an organisation. So life's changed a lot then, and that kind of more holistic view of sustainability in construction is one of the big changes over the last decade. But a lot of people are still struggling with that.
Yeah. Before we get into where that led you and around the school as well, I'm sort of intrigued about maybe how did that shape your own sustainability philosophy for yourself as a developer, and maybe in the developments that you're doing, because you were going through the 90s.
Yeah, this is really embarrassing. So 1990, we were in there, we were just stripping everything out. waste segregation. That didn't happen. It was like we didn't see any of the materials as potential income streams for materials, apart from anything which was metal. Anything which was metal, it was there was a value to that, and therefore, but everything else is just a cost. And it was like so. Big difference there in terms of the way we now look at it. I suppose the only thing that I could say, trying to make some defence for myself, we weren't rebuilding the buildings. So most people in those days were thinking, well, we'll knock that building down. It's a Victorian warehouse. Why do you want that? Knock it down, build some big glass building. And that's clearly nowadays, we all understand that's where the embodied carbon really is. And so, you've got your groundworks, you've got your steel, you've got your concrete, and that's huge. Whereas you retrofit a program and a building, that's you're saving a huge amount of embodied carbon. And we're seeing that all the time now in the city. You look at the British Land Development and the great work they're doing now around the Broadgate development, Liverpool Street. And now that rather than knocking buildings down, on the whole, they're looking to say, well, how can we take them back to the shell and core? How can we expand that steel frame? How can we build a more sustainable building, but without having to do all the groundworks, the basements, the foundations, and the piling, and all that deeply intensive, carbon intensive building. So I suppose you see that happening now. Back in the day, we were just reusing buildings. Let's call it retrofit. So it did change us. But I did a project recently, and it completely changed where I was looking to retrofit some of the buildings, because we kept some of the premises that we were developing back in the 1990s, and we've been renting them out. But now we're on a strive to turn them into take them off gas, off fossil fuels, and make them electric only, make them future proof. So whilst EPC rating and all that drive from government's changed, look, it's coming. Now if you're a landlord, you've got to think ahead and say, well, if I'm going to do some kind of deep retrofit program here to refurbish the building, why would I not make the decision now to put in an electric boiler or put in better insulation or whatever? Because if I put a gas boiler, well, sometime in the next 10 years I'm going to replace it. I'm not going to be allowed to replace it, so I'm going to have an additional cost to do it. And interesting, as a landlord, there's significant cost savings to moving to electric heating systems rather than gas heating systems. I don't know if you've ever tried to get yourself a plumber, central heating engineer in central London when all systems break down at the same time when it's cold. But if your electric heating system breaks down, pretty easy to fix it. You can just put another one in, and anybody can do it. And if you insulate the buildings well enough, and what we've learned about interior installations, triple glazing, and putting in systems to capture the heat which is leaving the building, the mechanical heating and heat recovery systems, we're finding out now that the flats and the offices we have need very, very little energy to actually heat them going forward. Very little. One of our biggest problems is clients now asking for air conditioning, and so where 20 years ago nobody would ask for that, now even residential people say, well, we'd like air conditioning. So the ability to shield it from the sun and have apartments which are dual aspects, so you can use natural cooling or whatever, is really, really important. So having all that means we can now put all that into practice, and having putting something into the practice, use that in some of our learning materials that we develop. Like in the school, we've developed a whole retrofit program, and it's really great to have actually gone through it and done it, and and understand what the problems are, and understand that the planners, because you're in a conservation area, will push back on virtually everything. And then when you say you're going to put a heat pump, expect your neighbour and your other neighbour to moan, oh, I've heard heat pumps are really noisy. I said, but have you ever heard a heat pump? No, but I've heard they're noisy. And it's all the kind of, that kind of people side of retrofit, which is kind of an interesting thing that we don't take into account when we're looking at change management.
It is a lot of myths and misconceptions, I think, in that market. Before we come on, we could talk about sort of current trends and challenges. I sort of, you mentioned the school many times, and there might be a lot of listeners that sort of don't know what we're talking about or have never come across it. So, tell us a little bit about the school, its mission. It started 12 years ago.
It did, yeah. So Supply Chain Sustainability School is the name of our online learning platform, and it's an education platform which has a mission to develop a sustainable built environment through knowledge and collaboration. That's our mission, and our vision is, in the future, everyone will have the skills to develop a sustainable built environment. That's our vision. Everyone will have the skills, because it's not about sustainability professionals having the skills. It's about everybody. If I'm installing plasterboard, I've got to know it's really important not to leave any holes or gaps in it or whatever, because we can't have gaps. We can't have, that's where the performance gap comes from. So everybody's got to have those skills. So Supply Chain School provides learning free at the point of use for anybody around sustainable construction in the UK or further afield if they want to. So last year we had 50,000 people access our learning and register and take learning and get CPD accreditation for that. You can learn by watching videos, by listening to people, by doing e-learning modules and getting a test at the end, by going to virtual classrooms, by virtual conferences, reading reports, all that type of stuff. But the key thing with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, because it's free at the point of use, like the health service, and I've been really passionate about that. Because another thing I learned in my old businesses was lots of the impacts and lots of the innovation and solutions lie in the supply chain. But that supply chain is probably 80% small businesses. Yeah. Well, those small businesses don't get the access to the market they need. It's harder for them to have that access because they don't have the marketing budgets, sales budgets. And they don't pay for consultancy and advice and support because they see it as quite rightly as an expensive thing. So we've got to educate those people. And we were working with, so before we started the Supply Chain School, we were working with some major construction procurers, and particularly three. We were working with Skanska, working with Lend-Lease, and we were working with Morgan Sindall. And we were working independently with them, and they were saying, look, we can't build the sustainable infrastructure and the sustainable buildings that our clients are increasingly asking for. This is back in 2010. Without a more sustainable supply chain. We don't know how to procure a more sustainable supply chain. So, because we've written the British standard and the international standard in sustainable supply chain management, we got invited in to explain how to do it. So we're helping their procurement teams. But what came really clear was you can ask as much as you want, but if it doesn't exist in the supply chain, you're not going to be able to buy it, or if you do buy it, it's going to cost you more. So there was a lack of capability and capacity in the supply chain. So we said to, I think the first one was Morgan Sindall, if you're going to tackle this, you're going to need to do a supply development program and build the skills of your current suppliers, who are all really good suppliers, and you've got to give them the skills to understand about sustainability. And they said, great, that sounds a really good idea. How much will that cost? It's construction, so how much will it cost? Cost rather than value. Told them how much it cost and said, we can't afford that. So I thought you might say that. I had the same conversation with Lend-Lease, same conversation with Skanska, and then I said, you actually all share a supply chain, don't you? You know, if you take the 100 suppliers, and some of them are going to supply to all three of you, some to two of you, some to one of you. Why don't we do a collaborative supply development program? And they said, sounds great. Will it work? And I said, don't know. I said, well, how are you going to deliver training to all those people? And I said, you can't afford to deliver training to 5,000 companies. We're going to have to do it online. So roll your minds back to 2010 when we were probably on dial-up internet for quite a lot of us still, and the idea of doing things and learning in e-learning and on an online platform wasn't at the top of people's agendas. And I said, well, we're going to have to do it online. And they said, have you ever done that before? I said, no, I haven't done that before. But God, it can't be that difficult, can it? We must be able to make this work. So persuaded them that if they worked together, it could work. And we went to the Construction Industry Training Board and said, we see you've got an innovation pot there. We've got this really innovative thing. And they said, will it work? And I said, well, it's innovation. It's like, it kind of leads me to a little segue. Like, why does everybody want something which is innovative, but they want it proven that it works? Yeah. It's kind of like, that's the problem with innovation, you know. So
we're a risk-averse industry.
Yeah, exactly. And so I said, let's go for it. So persuaded them to do it. And they said, well, we'll do it if you can get more people to collaborate. So eventually we got 7 companies to collaborate. Wow. Which still got Kier and Wilmot Dixon were added to that, Aggregate Industries were added to that as well. And so we got 7 organisations who were willing to collaborate. And I'm not sure that everybody really knew what they were collaborating in at the time. And we spent a year developing the product and developing the learning. And literally, I was developing learning modules, learning the techniques, all that type of stuff, working with a very small team at the time. And we developed it, and then we launched it, and suddenly we had 300 people at the launch, and we're like, ooh, it's quite interesting this. And then we thought, we'll go on a road show around the UK launching it. We did a kind of a 10-month road show where we were like going from town to town launching it. And at the end of that first year, we had something like 2,500 companies had registered, and we're starting to use this platform, and we're like, it's quite good, isn't it? It's like, and then it's grown from there really. It's like, but that growth came because we made it free at the point of use. And what we call our partner organisations, who've got this shared interest to develop their supply chain, we made them pay for it. They, ultimately they get the value out of it because they can now build the green infrastructure and the green buildings that society wants, but more importantly their clients want. So to meet their clients' requirements, they need to be able to demonstrate that. So it grew from there really, and that understanding that actually we need to collaborate together to solve sustainability problems, and that if you go into main contractors who build the buildings which are designed by clients, we need to engage the subcontractors and the product suppliers whose that supply chain management piece is delegated down to the main contractor to look after. So we really got to get those subcontractors, the main contractor and the product manufacturers collaborating together and working together to solve the problem. One thing we slightly failed to do in the school over time, and it's a regret of mine, we've never really landed the design community as well as we should do. Because if I ask members, that's members of people, you can be a free member to the school just by logging on and putting your details in. Then a member is somebody who's learned through the school in the last year. If you ask your members why can't your innovative solution be used, they will say one of two things. They'll say it's procurement's fault or it's design's fault, and they're probably right. Because if it's not designed and specified, it won't get bought. And even if it is designed and specified, there'll be a process of value engineering where it might get devalued out of the process. Change the spec. So those two bits are really important things, and I think we've done a pretty good job of helping to educate procurers, working with Chartered Institute Purchasing Supply, working with lots of procurement people we've got procurement groups in the school. But we could do better with the design group. And by design group, I don't mean just architects. I mean anybody from an ME designer through to QS, through everywhere, that whole kind of design and profession, which is so important. And I sometimes feel, and this is not a criticism if you're watching, I sometimes feel that as a school we've failed to build enough collaboration in those areas. We've touched on it, we've done a few things with Reba, and we've done a few things where we've got a small group of architects in our lean and off-site worlds, but we haven't really nailed the kind of the linkages between what gets designed, gets built, etc. And really we have to get the product manufacturers and the subcontractors who know how buildings are built. Somehow we have to get their knowledge in at the design stage, because the number of times I hear a specialist M&E company or something like that say, well, I've been given the drawings and the first thing I do is go and redraw them. And I think, well, what a waste of money.
And time
and effort, and then we wonder why the project's not delivered on time. And it's just so there is something there that it's in my could try harder box.
So just taking a step back, you've got 50,000 active users across sort of 8,000 companies. What's the profile of those users? Sort of who are they?
It's just interesting. We've got personas. You'll be familiar with personas. We've got a few personas. So we've got the sustainability champions. We've got the sustainability champions, sustainability professionals in their organisations, and on the whole, those people are our champions in an organisation. Really get the school, and will then work internally to make sure that, especially if they're a big company, that their learning gets put onto their learning management system, that people do training needs assessment, etc. And then the majority of people in sort of larger organisations will be non-sustainable people, sustainability people. There'll be commercial managers, there'll be site managers, there could be QSs or whatever. It's a whole range of kind of commercial procurement people as well. So it's non-sustainability people. So whereas an organisation like the UK Green Building Council does a great job at reaching sustainability people, we see our role in the world as persuading non-sustainability people to understand about sustainability and give them the skills to know how to develop a more sustainable future. So in large organisations, we get a sustainability champion, sustainability manager, whoever it might be. But pretty soon, if any organisation less than 100 people, it's unusual for them to have a sustainability manager. And the most usual thing is that poor person who was the safety manager has become he's now the health and safety and well-being manager, and also the environmental manager, and also the quality manager, and is now the sustainability manager, and probably got something else, and they're wheeled out whenever a bid needs to be written and what they're writing. And how on earth they do the job, I just don't know. But those people love what we do because it helps them educate people in their own organisation. We get a lot of owners, managers, directors of businesses in those kind of small and medium-sized companies as well. We specifically target those people because we believe that if we can change the leadership of the business to understand about sustainability issues, we can drive them to make sure that people in their business adapt to them. So if we're going to focus on anybody, let's focus on the kind of leadership, get them to change their attitudes towards sustainability, sell them on the business benefits, and then they will more than likely see the business benefits and will then engage their own internal teams. So we've got the personas of people working in large businesses, which is the sustainability managers who are key champions. In smaller businesses, it's the owner, manager, director who's our key target. Once you win those people across, we can land and expand into those organisations.
What I'm really intrigued about is with such an active user base like that and accessing so many resources, you must have amazing insight into sort of what's top of their agenda and how that's changed as well over the years. Can you give us sort of any fascinating insights into that?
Well, let's look at some topics let's look at social value. Social value was all the rage about 3 years ago. And now when I look at what's really interesting, without a doubt, carbon's right at the top of the agenda. And what we've seen, obviously, the big switch in that agenda now is that it's about embodied carbon now as well, and really understanding about embodied carbon. But for example, in the last year, we've launched and developed a nature collaboration group, and that is one of our best attended areas, and one of all the learning resources we have around nature right at the top of the list. If we look at our top 5, nature's made it into that top 5.
This is being driven by biodiversity net gain, I imagine.
And that's the first time since 2012. It's never been there before. It's kind of never been there. Nature and water rose at the bottom of our list of top 17. Not out of priority, it's just out of what people decided to learn about, because we've got all the data about what do people actually learn about. So at the top is carbon I was talking about. Sustainable procurement is right up there as well. People are wanting to understand, and that's the commercial side. People want to understand how are procurers buying more sustainably. So suppliers want to understand that, so they know how to reflect it. So this is part of winning the business case. So people need to know that sustainability is part of that commercial conversation. I often say, this whole kind of 3 pillars of sustainability piece. There is that economic piece in, there's the social and environmental, that economic piece. There is no point being the most sustainable business if you're out of business next year, which is kind of unusual from a sustainability passionate person to say that, but there isn't any point. So we've got to somehow balance it within reason. So nature's right at the top of the list at the moment, but social value, for example, has gone down that list over time, even though we've got public procurement requirements and whatever. And what we're seeing is now in actual fact, small businesses have always been really good at social value. I get involved in local cricket clubs, local rugby clubs, sports clubs. Local businesses always sponsor those types of things. It's a scaffolding company or a building company or whatever. They're doing it all the time. They've been doing it. They're taking on people from the local community. They're engaging the local community. They're going to local schools, and they do it kind of without thinking. Now we all call that social value, and suddenly we're getting the kind of there's 10% weighting on social value on public procurement. So now the small businesses have been told, well, what are you doing around social value? And they're like, I don't even know what it means. And they say, oh, well, we've been doing all that for the last 20 years or whatever. And then so now it's kind of like, well, how do we measure it? How do we monetize it? Is the conversation not how do we do more of it? Which is fundamentally, shouldn't it be about we want to do more of it, not just measure what we're already doing. So that's interesting. So that's gone down our list. Modern slavery is still up in the top 5, which is quite interesting because legal compliance around that. And there's a lot of, there's always stories in the news about modern slavery, isn't there? So it's important. And interestingly, EDI through Fairness, Inclusion and Respect, which is one of our 17 different sustainability topics, is right up there as well, which is probably, from a Futurebuild point of view, doesn't fit quite into it. But I'd argue it's about having the right people, right mix of people in their organisation to actually deliver the sustainable future we want. So, yeah, carbon's right up there. Nature's right up there this year. We find for small businesses as well, we have a topic called sustainability strategy and sustainability reporting. Reporting in the last year has come right up the list as well, because everybody's hearing the noise about CSRD, CSDDD. People, a lot of the main contractors have now got science-based targets. They've then got a requirement on their supply chain to report to them. Therefore, supply chain is saying, well, what do we need to report? How can we make this more simple? How can I make sure the data that I'm collecting I can give to all of my clients, so I don't have to collect different data for 10 different clients.
And this is going to link in with EPDs as well, as that
Exactly.
comes in.
Yeah, it will, yeah, absolutely. EPDs, obviously, EPDs is more on a product side,
Right.
But equally, there's quite a few subcontract trades who will also provide the product, isn't there? Yeah. So they need to understand about what EPDs are, how to read an EPD, all that type of stuff. And we've done a bit of work on that with some of the kind of plasterboard manufacturers like Etex and what have you. And as a result of that, they simplified their EPDs. I don't know if you've ever read an EPD, but there's a little bit you need on it, and then the rest of it you're kind of like, I can't understand this. But it's how do you find that little bit of information you really need? What's the carbon over its lifetime? There's always a nice box which summarises it, but getting to that box is quite often quite hard in 10, 20 pages of an EPD, and it's not in a consumable nature. And one of the things the school does really well is we try to make a complex subject simple for non-sustainability managers. Yeah, so I think that's really important. There is a challenge of EPDs. We can talk about that later on, about how we use those.
Yeah, no, that'd be good. I imagine then with this insight as well, you can almost start to have some foresight really into sort of what's the biggest challenges going forward as well. What do you see the sort of...
So one of our biggest challenges actually is looking at the insight about who uses the skill, not about the topic. How do we reach people who work on site?
Yeah.
Because actually, there isn't a way to reach people on site. The only way to educate people on site is through toolbox talks. That's basically the only way that we educate anybody on site. And they're not a great methodology because you can get people in a room, but are they listening? There's no check to find out whether they've been learning. The delivery of it either relies on a product manufacturer to deliver their sales pitch, for want of a better phrase, or relies upon the site manager to deliver a toolbox talk on a subject they didn't know anything about yesterday. And so it's not good quality. So we're thinking, how do you develop better quality learning? How do you package up learning as well? So if you work on a desktop, maybe an hour-long module when you can pause after 20 minutes and whatever, and then come back to it at a later stage is quite okay to do, or read or whatever. But on a construction site, 50% of people are self-employed. They don't have a company email address. They don't have a company device. So how do you reach those people? So we'll be launching in the autumn a new app, and we're packaging up our learning into real bite-size kind of for at an operative level, 5 minutes long with a little test at the end and a bit of gamification and rewards around that as well. We're going to trial this process over the next year about, can we reach people who work on site? Are they interested? What are the levers we can pull to get them to learn? So
building in some gamification, almost like the Duolingo app, if you're learning a new language.
Exactly. In fact, I was in a development thing yesterday, which was good, and they were out there like, Duolingo, have you seen this? It's like, and it was literally like that. You're giving stars and virtual coins for things like, and all that type of stuff is what we're looking to do to make it interesting. And we're going to trial it on one subject to start with, then we roll out that trial to different subjects. So our FM. So within our school, we've also got people who look after the buildings once they're built, facilities management. And they've been saying, but we need a way of reaching, the cleaners to teach them why it's important not to put those chemicals down that sink, and because of environmental pollution. Or we need to turn off the lights, or whatever it might be. And even security people who are FM people. How do we educate those people better? So so they understand these issues, because we have no way of reaching those people because they don't have devices, they don't have email addresses. So we need a different way to reach those people. So that's one of the key learnings that we've it's been a dawning appreciation that actually we're doing really well at educating people who work in offices, but not very well at educating people who actually work on our construction sites, which is the majority of people in our industry. So that's one of the key learnings we've got. Another example of getting learnings was when we launched our retrofit program. So, we've got this grand ambition about a sustainable built environment, but we'd only really been doing for about 8 years, 9 years, talking about the new built environment, yeah. But as we all know, there's going to, by the time we get to 2045, 2050, well, all the buildings we're going to have in 2050, 80% of them are already being built. Yeah. So how are we going to retrofit them? So if we're serious about retrofit and we're serious about having a sustainable built environment, well, actually only 20% of our work is going into the new build side. We need to make sure that we're doing something for the other 80%. So really pleased that we're working with NatWest Bank, and we produced a whole range of learning for people who own properties, so to get them to understand why they need to retrofit. For people in the supply chain who are thinking, is this an opportunity for me or not? So back to that point about how do you reach owners and managers of small businesses who might currently be running a central heating company and thinking, this heat pump stuff, is there really going to be a market in it for me? What do I need to do? So educate those people to show them what the way the market's going. Yeah. They can make the decision at what speed they want to go then. And it's not about tomorrow I'll be a heat pump installer and today I'm a central heating. It's how I change my business over a period of time, isn't it? And how I ensure that I'm sustainable as I'm changing, because I want to keep looking after my current customers.
And you're absolutely right. And I think that touches on something I want to ask you about, which is obviously one of the biggest challenges I think we have in the built environment at the moment is our green skills gap. Yeah. And that's, education is key to that. And there's a retraining thing you mentioned there, the sort of, how do we retrain our gas safe engineers, yes, to be heat pump, and actually it's easier than going the other way than being an electrician and go into a heat pump, because they have to deal with deconducting gas. So, there's a good opportunity there. But yeah, sort of, how do we address that? I think with the green skills gap, there's a couple of things, isn't there? There's a retraining aspect, but also there's how do we attract new talent into the built environment as well. And I know that's something you're really passionate about.
Yeah, you've hit on two things there. You've hit on the skills gap, and there's a skills shortage and there's a skills gap. The skills shortage is in the construction industry. We don't have enough people to deliver the homes we want to build and the infrastructure we want to build. And I think right at the moment people are saying you're bonkers, because actually the market's, we're really struggling at the moment, etc. But if you to roll forward and say, well, actually in a few years' time, will we have enough people to build, was it 1.5 million homes? Will we have, a year. Yeah. Will we have enough people to retrofit? Is it 1 million homes a year we need to retrofit? Will we have enough people to build all these 150 major infrastructure projects which are being launched? Well, we might have enough people by importing them from Romania and other countries. We might have enough people if we decide to become a lot more efficient and move the way we build. But fundamentally, we do need more people in our industry. But once you got into the industry, you've got to make sure you've got the right skills. If I may, I'd like to break those two topics apart and say green skills is what we as a school are primarily about. We're about how do we give the skills to the people who are currently doing the job to make sure they've got the skills to go forward, because they're in the job. They just need to broaden their skills, and they need a 10% change or a 5% change or a 20% change to what they currently do. So one of the things we've done so example would be Telford Homes, and they worked with them, one of our partners, and we mapped out for every job function in that business, what did they need to know about, and then we provided learning pathways of knowledge within the school, what they needed to do over a period of time. The board got learning, the design team got learning, the procurement team got learning, the commercial team, the salespeople who were working selling the homes got learning. Everybody got some learning, and everybody's got to get it to hit that green skills gap. It's no good to say, well, it's just one or two professions. It's actually all of us need to do it, and all of us need to, and that's what the school's in business to do. But it's not just a school. Colleges need to be offering upskilling for the trades, because it's the trades we need to get to as well. Back down to the issue about how do we reach the trades, and the school, being an online platform, can't really offer the how do I fit a heat pump. You need to go to a centre to understand how to do that, quite rightly. But if you speak to the heat pump manufacturers, they've got places to do that. It's about getting the people to go and do it is the kind of key thing. So, got to sort out the current people. The school's working on that. Very interesting to hear the amount of money which has been released recently by the government to re-educate people currently in industry. I mean, they're talking about £600 million of investment into green skills, which is ginormous. A lot of that is onto the other bit, which is a skills shortage, which is how to get, I think they're talking about 60,000 new people into the industry, which is a big challenge. I think so. It works out, if my maths is correct, that's what, £10,000 per person they want to get into the industry, which is a huge investment by government to do that. When you look at how tight budgets are, and you know what we're not spending on with overseas aid budgets and other things, and having to spend money on defence. I think it's amazing that our industry has been given that amount of money, going to construction colleges, 10 new construction colleges, all those people, you know, giving placements and what to get people into the industry. That's good, but I've got to say there is a caveat there. Our research shows us that when we get new people into the industry, we're not good at keeping them. And this is where our Fairness, Inclusion, Respect programme comes in, that we're doing a lot of work on in the school, which is how do we make sure that we have a better culture on site, which is more respectful and more inclusive and is fairer for everybody who works on construction sites. And who wouldn't want that? You know, we're trying to reform the whole EDI agenda. So I suppose we're ahead of Trump. Yeah. Trump wants to get rid of EDI. We've said, no, we think we need to reform it and to say it's about making construction sites and construction industry better for everybody. Because our data shows us that once you get people, young people into the industry and people from diverse backgrounds into the industry, they're leaving at a quicker rate than they're joining. So we've got this massive leaky bucket that we're topping it up, and the government arguably is putting more water into that bucket right now to fill it up even quicker. But it's got these big holes in the side, and it's you know, leaking out at the sides, and that's not good. And there's things we need to sort about that, about getting the culture right on site, so that when we do train and invest all this investment in getting people to join the industry. But there's also something we need to do about training people through the attraction, recruitment and selection process, because there is a misconception that we don't get enough young people, enough people from ethnic minority backgrounds and enough people from female people applying for the industry. Our data shows us something completely different. Going back to your point about data, we had a survey last year of over 500,000 people who've applied to work in the construction industry, and that data showed us that actually over 40% of people who apply to work in the construction industry were from an ethnic minority background. Less than, well, arguably around 10% of people working in the industry are from it.
So you're not seeing that reflected on site?
We're not seeing that reflected on site, and we're not seeing it reflected through the recruitment process. From a female perspective, it was about 27% of people who applied for the industry to work in the industry were female, and we're nowhere near that in terms of the people we recruit or the people who work on site. It's less than
Where do you think we have our biggest problem? Because I think we talked about specifiers all the way to on-site. I think there's a perception it's the on-site part that's the least diverse.
I think it's throughout, to be honest. I think actually on-site, in some ways, it's very diverse. Okay. You know, with people from different cultures, from Eastern Europe or India or wherever, working on site. There's lots of cultures. They're mainly male, and they're mainly of a certain age. So we do have some form of diversity on site, but our problem is in actually our data shows us, because we actually also collected data on 250,000 people who went through the whole recruitment process. So the people who participated in the survey were able to show us this data. And actually, if you are from an Indian or an Arab background, 175 applications for one person to get a job. If you're from a white male background, 25 applications to get a job. And it is to do with the skills we have, and we have people doing a lot of recruitment in construction are not HR people. So we have this perception that we're not getting the people applying. We are getting the people applying, but we're in big numbers, but we're screening them out at the selection process before they even get an interview, is what our data shows us. Once it gets to the interview stage, they're doing pretty well, but they're getting screened out through unconscious bias. If I'm a small bricklayer, tendency is people who look like me, people in my social network and what have you, I'm probably down the local pub or something like that, or friends and family. That's the way it's always been done. How do we change that? I think we do need to change that, but we also need to work on the culture on site, because we might change that whole selection process and get more people applying, but if we don't solve the leaky bucket, we won't solve the issue with getting a better culture on site. And why should we be concerned about better culture on site? Well, it's just some really strong business reasons for it. We need to reflect the society which we're building for. It's shown that if everybody looks the same, are the same, behaves the same, well, when it comes to solving a problem, we've only got one solution, haven't we? We know that if you've got a diverse group of people, you're going to get more innovation, you're going to get better ways of doing things, etc., which is really important as well. And if you're getting miscommunication on site because it's not fair, it's not inclusive, safety becomes an issue then as well, doesn't it? So there's many benefits, and if you look at reports done by Deloitte and others, they've made the business case for why you need a diverse community or a diverse workforce. So we need to sell that not because it's the right thing to do, but on the basis of it's good for business.
I suppose one of our biggest challenges, we're an industry of SMEs. So how do we solve that on, as you said, the family-run business that's been doing it that the right way? And I suppose on site there is a hazing culture, wrongly or rightly, but we've had schemes, haven't we? We've had things like the constructor schemes now for many years, and these things in place. So I imagine this isn't happening as much in the tier one contractors that you deal with and educate, but we need that to filter down.
It does happen in the tier one contractors. It does happen in major consultancy firms as well. We were able to cut the data between major consultancy firms and contractors, and we actually benchmarked this year against the solicitors profession as well, which is really interesting. Solicitors profession pretty much 50-50 when you get people in there. Their issue is when you go up through the business, the gender mix goes completely wrong. So when you look at the data, it shows that it's not just small businesses. In fact, small businesses quite often are very diverse. But what you quite often get is businesses who are, you might get a Sikh business and then they're all Sikh or whatever it might be. How do you get that diversity within a business is important. Now that's where the school comes in, because I've had the passionate belief around sustainability in its widest form, both environmental and the people side of sustainability. There's never been any shortage of knowledge. There's been a shortage of people accessing that knowledge. We've known about climate change for a long, long time, haven't we? And we've known what some of the solutions are, and arguably building new homes we've got the solutions right now. We might choose not to use them, not to buy them. We've got the solutions to infrastructure around concrete. The low carbon concrete exists. We might choose not to buy it because it costs a bit more, but that's the choice we're making. It's not like we're in the world of aeroplanes where there's no choice but to use. We can't do a solar powered jumbo jet, can we? That's a technical problem we've got to overcome. In construction, we've overcome a lot of the technical problems. We might not choose to use them, might not choose to specify them. But we've got to get the right people into the business, which is important. So my point about how do you work with SMEs is that there's no shortage of knowledge, but we need the procurement leverage to make the small business sit up and think, the owners and managers of those small businesses to go, right, okay, my customer's asking me for this, my client is asking me for this, building regulations are asking me for this. I've heard something on the news about Keir Starmer asking me for this. And we've got to be consistent with that message to the supply chain. So, if one of your customers asks you to do things, you might think, that's an interesting point of view. If two ask you to do it, that's interesting. Well, if 5 ask you to do it, you might sit up and listen. If 10 of your customers are asking you to do it, I think at that stage you might say, right, okay, I better learn about this stuff because actually there seems to be something in it. So that procurement leverage is the underlying success of the supply chain school's business model. Because without that procurement leverage, without Barrett's telling their key suppliers, this is our direction of travel, come with us on this direction of travel. We're not going to drop you tomorrow if you're not the greenest business in the world, but in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, if you haven't done it, in 5 years' time, you will be doing less business with us or no business.
So some of them started mandating?
Some have mandated, some have made it advisory. They say, well, we'd like, if you want to be part, exactly, that's a nice one. If you'd like to be part of our strategic supply chain, you need to be at silver level or gold level in the school, and that's good. If you're bidding for work on HS2, there's a question about what you're doing for the sustainability school, for example. That's great. It's lovely to be, we started off many years ago, kind of as an outlier, but it's lovely when you're seeing procurement leverage like that and you keep becoming part of the kind of institution, as it were. It becomes like something that people must do, and it's great when we're seeing that from major organisations saying you must do this. So I would think probably about 40% of our partner organisations are now building into their procurement processes that you should be doing. You should be able to demonstrate your learning around sustainability, and doing it through the supply chain school at being at a level is a really good way of doing that.
And so being a data-driven business, it's very easy. We talked about some of the insights that you've got, but how do you measure impact? And because you're having an amazing positive impact on the environment. But
it's a really interesting question, impact. And I think it was something when I first started the school, we were all looking at impact as activity. It's like, we just need to get people learning. Learning's good, just get them learning. Ian, how many people have learned? So I'd like, these 7 organisations that I persuaded them to do this, like, how many this week, Ian? Yeah. Don't ask me that question anymore. But how many this week? And I'd say, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever it might be. And it was all about activity, and how many activities do we put on, training activities, and how much output from that activity. And we have this model now there where when people first come to supply chain school, the first thing we say to them is, do a training needs analysis. Understand where your current level of knowledge is around sustainability, and we'll examine you against 17 different areas. Examine is an interesting phrase. Basically, we take you through an online test. We give you carbon, we give you 5 statements. Which statement best reflects your current level of knowledge? So it's easy to do. There's no test. You can't get it right or wrong. You just say where I am, which statement reflects. And based upon that, you then get a tailored learning plan, which takes into account your level of learning, but also what trade category you're in. Because if you're a concrete company, clearly understanding about embodied carbon is your number one thing. But if you're a site security company, embodied carbon, you don't need to know anything about that. You might need to know about switching the lights off and things like that, and that is important, or about how you get your staff in terms. But that's a minor issue. But people issues is your thing. So you do a sustainability assessment, and that enables us to tailor the learning that each individual gets within the school, which is really powerful, and we can then track what they do. But interestingly, that then gives us a baseline of where your knowledge is. Well, we've got that data now for 10,000 people a year. So 10,000 people a year do a sustainability skills assessment. So we got a huge set of it. But next year, they do it again. Yeah. So we can now show an outcome of the learning they've done and say, the outcome of learning is they had this level of knowledge, now they've got this level of knowledge. So we can, so it's a bit, let's take the education example. So that's now like, you've gone to university, you've done your education, you've done your test. Now, having done your test, you can now say, I've learned this much. Yeah. So you've now got this level of learning. So that's good. So we've got this level of learning, which has been done. And there is a level of learning after each course, but actually we're more interested in about the direction of travel. So, get everybody to reassess, or as many people as possible every year, and see what the trends are. So that gives us lots of knowledge about where people's level is going. But that only gives us what I would call an outcome. It's great having knowledge, but what if you don't do anything with it? Yeah. So we've got to persuade people to do something with it as well. So that's why we have so many case studies in the school, or case studies about where people have taken the knowledge and they've done things differently. They've changed the business model. Company we work with called ProTech, and they've moved to a circular economy model where they do that protection of Fomex, isn't it, which say on a Corex boarding. You fit a new kitchen and then you put Corex boarding all over it so you don't damage it. All used to just get thrown away. They learned during the kind of oil crisis that their product is basically oil based, and then the cost of it goes up through the roof. Why is that? That's a problem. Why don't we just take it back at the end? If we take it back, we can recrumb it and remanufacture it. So we've gone for this circular economy model. When you get case studies like that, it makes people think, yeah, there's something good in that. Yeah. So that's the real impact. However, what we do to try to quantify that impact, we now do an annual impact survey, kind of state of the nation, and we go out to our 50,000 people and say, okay, what difference did we make to your business? Did you reduce your carbon? Did you increase your biodiversity net gain? Did you reduce your water usage? Did you reduce your waste? Have you taken on more apprentices? Have you got a better understanding of modern slavery? And we asked them 17 questions about what they've done around their sustainability impacts, but we're also asking them things about their understanding on retrofit, etc., etc. So probably asking 30 questions. Now we have over 1,000 people fill in that survey every year, which is quite incredible.
And then this is something you share with your partners?
Share it with everybody.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, share it with everybody. So one of the great things about the school is it's all free at the point of views. Just share it all. If we're going to solve this problem, just share it all. Make it freely available. And so, for example, we're reviewing the data this morning, and we're looking at the data and saying how great it is that I think it was 62% of the companies we worked with last year reduced their carbon footprint, which is great. But then that's not good enough either in terms of the impact the school's having. So that's the impact. That's what's happening in the supply chain. But has the school had any impact? Help the company to do that. So we asked the members of the school, have we actually helped you to make that difference? And they give an attribution level to us. So it's a complex subject, isn't it? And when I look at other institutions like universities, Construction Industry Training Board and others, I don't see anybody who's providing impact data about, well, we educate somebody and it makes this difference. So we've come up with this way of looking at impact data. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm just saying it's better than nothing. And again, it helps us to inform what we should do and where we should put effort into it. So it's great to see, and sometimes the data comes back and says it's worse. So about 3 years ago, I was really getting fed up with the fact that we weren't shifting the dial, and if anything, it was getting worse about small and medium-sized suppliers and subcontractors reducing their carbon. And I said, we've got to do something about this. It's just ridiculous. And when we dug into it, it turned out that actually they weren't even measuring their carbon, never mind reducing their carbon. It's like, we're even measuring their energy. I had no idea how to do it. So I said, well, we've got to provide a tool. So the school now provides what we call a carbon calculator, which enables everybody, there's lots of them around, but just because they're in the school, you've now got a carbon calculator. If you're in the supply chain to a Barrow or a Morgan Sindall or whatever, you can put your data in there, and then it attributes based upon turnover your carbon to all of your customers. So you don't have to report it once. So we now have, I think the data's gone up to 1,200, 1,400 suppliers now reporting that data. So again, we can start looking at that data and saying which of those suppliers are actually reducing. We've got real data now. The problem with collecting data, and I'm sure many listeners who mature in this area will know that when you start going out to collect data, the data you get to start with on the whole is not very good data. And it might take you 2 or 3 years to start getting good, reliable data.
Fine-tune that,
Really, and that's hard. So again, we say you need to start reporting this data. If you don't know how, here's some learning to enable you to do that. You don't know where to get your kilowatt hours from a gas bill? Literally, we'll show them how to go and get a kilowatt hour off a gas bill to get it. It's real basic stuff, but the number of organisations that don't collect their data is huge number still, and don't calculate their carbon footprint is huge. We because people who attend Futurebuild, because people who sit around my steering group are sustainability experts, we're in this echo chamber, and we believe our understanding of sustainability is probably what everybody's got.
Yeah. No, you're right. We've really got to break it down. You're absolutely right. I think we do sometimes live in our own bubble.
Yeah.
In that respect. I've got 2 questions to finish the podcast off. We could talk for hours, by the way. But my first one is around, you talk a lot about partnerships and collaboration. If I'm listening to this, and actually if you came to Future, there's a good chance you're going to be a member. But what if I'm I want to come and partner and collaborate with the school? How do I go about that? How can I get involved? Who are you looking for as well to sort of get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if we looked at for people leading the change, and we're looking for main contractors, big house builders. We're looking for large tier 1 subcontractors, because I think we've got to get them involved in the conversation. Yeah, M&E contractors and people like that are really important. We're looking for product manufacturers, and we touched on this earlier in the podcast. We want to get those design communities involved as well. We've got a few like your Mott McDonald's and people like that, but I really think there's a lot more we can do with the design community. I suppose the pitch for them is a little bit more complicated because they say, well, we don't have a supply chain. I would argue you do have a supply chain, you just don't pay them. You're designing a building that then needs to get built, and controversially, I think you abdicate that responsibility. I don't think you should be abdicating that responsibility. And if you had a closer relationship with the supply chain, you could build even better buildings for your clients. I think that's really important. So those organisations are organisations who we'd love to partner with, which help fund the school and develop the knowledge base. But if you're a member, it's free to be a member. Get involved by going to supplychainschool.co.uk. That's my first free advert, isn't it? Yeah. Supplychainschool.co.uk. Get involved there. Just register for your account and start your learning journey. But you'll find that there's lots of stuff you can just do online, on-demand learning and what have you. But then there's also virtual classrooms you can get involved in, where with tutor-led, there'll be 15 or 16 people talking about embodied carbon or how to do a carbon footprint, and they'll talk you through how to do it, and you'll be broken up into little groups of 4 with other people at the same level of learning as you. You're all making the same mistakes, so it's all right it's a safe space. You can even speak to your clients and tell, or potential clients, and find out that actually they're not doing it as well as you thought they were either. So it's a safe space. It's a really interesting thing. Sustainability and the supply chain school it's not a place for competition. It's a place for collaboration. Major contractors and house builders might decide to take those sustainability offerings of their supply chain and offer that to their clients, and then it becomes a part of their product offering. That's a point of competition for them. But in terms of developing the knowledge base, all of our partners see it's a collaborative activity, not an area of competition.
And then my last question for you is, what does the future hold for the supply chain school? I know you've got exciting expansion plans.
Yeah, we've got that. Yeah, you know what? I'm super excited about the future. So we've already talked about the reach onto construction sites, which is really important for us. We set ourselves at the beginning of COVID, we were educating 8,000 people a year. So here we are, 5 years on, we're educating 50,000 people. Massive growth. We've just set ourselves a new target to reach 100,000 people. But it's not really reaching, it's about how far we go beyond that. I think we can reach a lot more people. In fact, we've recently started reaching out to the next generation and working with construction colleges. Yeah. And I had what I called a very happy moment the other day. I was speaking to my advisory board this morning, and they looked at me, Ian, a very happy moment? I said, well, because I'm happy all the time. So what's a very happy moment? I said, well, I got sent a film from a college that I've never, who are one of our partner organisations who've been using the supply chain skills content to educate the next generation about modern methods of construction, about sustainable construction, about about embodied carbon, etc. And this college had produced this video without us asking about a class full of the next generation, all on their laptops and computer screen with supply chain school on it, all accessing and learning at their own pace, and then little talking head videos about how they were using the content and how great they found it to be accessing industry-led content and hearing the industry talk about why this is really important. It made it really, really fun. And I thought, it's great that we're doing that. Even better that they, completely off their own back, they produced something and sent it to us. I was super proud. So I think there's a huge world we can go there about the next generation. There's a huge place we can go about people who are currently working on site. So we can go way beyond 100,000 users, I'm absolutely sure. But in addition to that, construction's a global industry as well, and a year ago we launched a new platform in Ireland, and that's going really well, and I'm delighted there. We've got about 25 partners over there with building a tremendous head of steam up there, and it's really interesting. And our Irish partners say, look, we're probably 5 or 6 years behind where the UK market is, so that's going superbly well. And in a fabulous piece of timing and strategic nonsense, I suppose, by myself. We decided a year ago to invest in the development of a school for the American market, and we launched that. About 4 days after President Trump came to power. So let's watch this space in terms of what happens in the American market. But
well, he's got grand aspirations of building a lot of factories.
Yeah, hopefully he'll build them more sustainably. Yeah, but he has, and clearly in the DEI world, that's interesting. But you have to remember, in the States is not one country. It's like the California market is bigger than the UK market. Yes. And when you start understanding that, if you start mapping the number of LEED platinum buildings in the States, it's huge. Yeah. Many more than the UK. But they're all in what you would call the blue states, not the red states. So you can, and sustainability and building regulation is actually delivered at a state level. It's not. No. Federal government has a big building program, and I'm sure there's going to be nothing about sustainability in that. But one of our founding partners to the school in America is based in Houston.
Right.
And I'm like, you can't get a state which doesn't like sustainability more than Texas, but they're based in Houston, and they're like, yeah, but we sell into California, so we sell into New York, we sell into the EU. All these, we've got to reflect what our customers need, and our investors are telling us we need to do it. And it's there. So it might take us longer to realise our ambitions in the States than we thought it was going to be, but it's exciting times. And we went to the States because our partners in the UK who work in the States said, we need something in the States because we're using English content to train people in America, and it doesn't land particularly well when it's the wrong PPE, it's a long, the trucks look different, the building sites look different, the scaffolding's different, the examples of buildings you give are different, the building code's different. So I say the essence of carbon, the essence of water or biodiversity are the same issues. We've got to contextualise it, use local accents, local people, local examples. So that's really super exciting. So we're on a major growth expansion plan at the moment. If not now, when? We've got a great product. We've got lots of intellectual property. We've got the unbelievable need in society for what we're doing. So if you can't grow a business and do good now, when can we do it?
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to watch your journey, and I've got no doubt you'll hit that 100,000 users pretty soon as well. So
brilliant.
Thank you,
and I'm looking forward to coming to Futurebuild, and we had a great time at Futurebuild just last month. It was great. Thank you.
And I think we've got a similar mission. We bring people together and we educate them, and
it's exactly
we drive that sustainability.
Just different ways to get to the market, and there has to be. There can't just be one way. There's got to be lots of different ways to reach the market, and lots of different ways of packaging content up and reaching people. And we've got to bring people face to face, and we just don't have the budget to bring lots of people face to face. And when you see things like Futurebuild, which bring people in and allow them to have conversations and discussions, and I love working. I get to go to these events and stand on the stands and stand on the platforms, and the people you meet. Your stakeholders you meet, the efficiency of time when you can meet, I don't know, you probably meet 50, 60 people in a day. Well, you can't do that any other way, can you?
No. Well, I couldn't say it better myself, so thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll put the details of the school all on the description.
Brilliant.
And thanks for being such a great partner.
It's been great. Thank you very much.